Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum. Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli amma ba'du. Dearest participant of Urban Sufism, as mentioned in the flyer, I am Nina Nurmila. I will be moderating the discussion tonight. We will have a book discussions on the recent book, Why as a Muslim I Defend Liberty. The author is here, Mustafa Akyol. Well, I'm very glad that this is my second forum with the author, Mustafa Akyol. Previously, I was the discussion of the book Reopening Muslim Minds. It's very, a big congratulations for having published 2 books in a year. Yeah, what a productive writer you are. And then I really enjoy reading your book, and it is easy to understand your book, and you come back and forth in your book, and you start your book, yeah, with the case of your experience, yeah, that how coercion result in hypocrisy, not piety, in the cases of how Arabian women dress, yeah. And as a professor of gender and Islamic studies, I'm happy also that you include the gender issue, not only about wearing the veil, but also how patriarchal and misogynistic interpretation has been unjust to women, like in the case of Jafran Bibi, yeah, a rape victim who was accused of committing zina for being unable to have 4 witnesses, which is, it's not easy to find, yeah. And as I mentioned earlier, as a moderator, I will tell our program tonight. It will be first a welcoming speech from our host, CakNurian Urban Sufism, Professor Komaruddin Hidayat, and then this will be followed by the author's presentation of the book for about 20 minutes, and then the discussion by Professor Dr. Ruhaini Dzuhayatin, and this will be followed by a question and answer. So let's begin our first program tonight by having welcoming remark from the host of CakNurian Urban Sufism, Professor Komaruddin Hidayat, the current rector of International Islamic University of Indonesia. Professor Komaruddin Hidayat, time is yours for the welcoming remark.
Thank you, Nina. Bismillah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, syukurillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah ma ba'du. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude and thanks to my colleague Mustafa Akyol. I really delighted to have you tonight. It is the second time to provoke our ideas and tonight concerning the importance of liberty. But allow me, I would like to share briefly, give introduction in Bahasa Indonesia. Just less than 10 minutes. Pada sekalian, kebebasan beragama satu punya dimensi metaphysical freedom, la ikraha fiddin. Dari keberagaman sangat private, tidak ada yang bisa intervensi kebebasan kita. Nobody can take our freedom in that area, fiddin. Karena ini sangat individual. Nah, ketika kita keluar dari dimensi individual zone kepada family life, communal life, social life, sungguhnya di situ kita sudah kadang-kadang membuat satu reduction, kadang juga pakai topeng, ya, pakai mask, ya, masker. Jadi kebebasan kita tidak akan muncul karena lingkungan kita kadang-kadang memaksa kita untuk tidak bisa mengutarakan kebebasan kita. Tapi sungguhnya dalam iman lebih-lebih itu sangat private. Only I and Allah, only you and God who knows your real iman, your freedom. Makanya Islam dipaksa itu sudah paradoxical, ya. Paradoks interminus, beragama karena paksaan tidak mungkin, tidak melahirkan keikhlasan, ketulusan, dan juga tidak mungkin beragama dipaksa. Yang kedua, kata freedom, it has so many meaning about freedom, liberty, hurriyah. ada pendekatan yang populer, yaitu freedom from dan freedom to, negative freedom and positive freedom. The basic, the very substantial freedom is freedom from. Kita terbebaskan dari penindasan, dari ancaman, dari kebodohan, dari ini. Jadi bebas dari itu sungguhnya yang paling primer orang mencari freedom from. Ya. Al-Quran mengatakan alladzi at'amahum min ju' wa amanahum min khauf. Jadi kita the freedom from political insecurity, political intimidation, dan juga from economical scarcity, economical insecurity. Itu yang pertama dirasakan freedom itu, freedom from itu dari tekanan politik dan dari penyakit, dari kelaparan dan sebagainya. Tapi karena manusia itu adalah juga makhluk yang punya will, punya power, punya reason, maka ada freedom to grow, freedom to. Sebab dengan freedom to, that mean that we are growing to be something, to be someone, to be somebody. Freedom to. Menjadi persoalan adalah ketika freedom to itu kemudian mengganggu kebebasan orang lain. Sebagaimana ada anekdot ketika ada yang makan kambing itu apa? Apa itu di hutan itu? Singa apa yang suka ngejar kambing apa?
Serigala.
Serigala. Nah, ketika serigala, apa serigala bahasa Inggrisnya itu? Lion.
Wolf.
Wolf makan kambing. Bagi serigala itu freedom to. I free to eat, to catch, ya, lamb, domba. Tapi bagi kambing, saya diintervensi, tidak bebas dari freedom from, gitu kan. Jadi ketika ular makan katak, ini ada satu anekdot Sunan Kalijogo. Ketika jalan-jalan di sawah, ada katak itu teriak-teriak, tolong, 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 gitu kan. Sunan Kalijogo bingung. Kemudian dia, kalau aku ganggu agar katak selamat, aku menghalangi freedom to, itu rezekinya ular. Tapi kalau aku biarkan, itu berarti akan makan nasibnya kodok, katak. Bingung ini kan? Jadi di situ there is conflict between freedom from and freedom to. Maka Sunan Kalijogo bilang hu, gitu kan. Pas bilang hu, itu kemudian kataknya dilepas. Lain kali ular ketemu Sunan Kalijogo. Sunan Kalijogo, Anda mengganggu saya, itu rezeki saya dapat rezeki katak. Tapi gara-gara kamu teriak hu, aku kaget sehingga katak itu loncat gitu. Terus Sunan Kalijogo bilang, oh, hu itu maksudnya huntalen, gitu. Makanlah, gitu kan? Gitu. Nah, cerita itu di satu hari kemudian maksudnya apa? Aku dengar itu huntalen, enggak, itu huculno gitu, lepaskan gitu kan. Jadi di situ problem bisa problem between the freedom to from the essential freedom need to growing, to grow, to be to something. Bagaimana kita mempertemukan dudun tiyati ghairihi. Kebebasan seseorang itu dibatasi oleh kebebasan yang juga di hak orang lain. Contohnya ketika Anda dulu in the course tinggal di asrama, di dormitory. Anda pulang ujian kuliah, Anda ingin nyanyi-nyanyi, melepaskan capek nyanyi-nyanyi. Sementara sebelahnya ingin tenang karena lagi belajar, jadwal ujiannya berbeda. Jadi yang sebelah dia ingin merdeka dari gangguan, freedom from, sementara Anda lagi ingin freedom to untuk menyanyi, kan? Nah, di situ kemudian benturan. Akhirnya apa? Kompromi. Jadi silahkan Anda menggunakan kebebasan Anda, tapi Anda jangan mengganggu kebebasan orang lain. Itulah gunanya undang-undang, itulah gunanya aturan, itulah gunanya demokrasi. How to manage the conflict of freedom. Ya. Yang kedua terakhir, the last notes that I would like to share, bahwa kebebasan freedom itu ada moral freedom, political freedom, physical freedom, circumstantial freedom gitu. Jadi moral freedom itu tidak bisa diintervensi. Tapi kalau physical freedom, orang masuk tahanan, masuk penjara, itu secara fisik dia tidak merdeka. Tapi demi mempertahankan kebebasan moral, orang rela masuk penjara. Misalnya Buya Hamka. Buya Hamka ya, put in jail, he lost his physical freedom, his political freedom, but he maintain his moral freedom, his dignity. Gitu kan. Mandela also doing the same thing. To maintain his dignity, moral freedom, then when he accept that he was put in jail. Jadi di situ ada kontradiksi antara physical freedom dan moral freedom. Artinya apa? Ada kalanya orang yang tinggal di penjara layaknya tidak merdeka, tapi jiwanya merdeka. Sebaliknya, some people maybe they feel that they stay in the palace or they have freedom to do something, but morally maybe they're in prison. Apa? Terpenjara. Terpenjara dari apa? Terpenjara dari kehinaan moral, korupsi, dan sebagainya. Mereka membayar lawyer agar bebas. Kelihatannya dia bebas, tapi moralnya sebenarnya tidak punya kemerdekaan. Nah, terakhir kita akan di Indonesia, di mana letak kemerdekaan dalam beragama? Kadang orang tua memaksa kita, mendidik kita. Nah, itu apa melanggar kebebasan atau tidak? Could be Muslim or Christian, whether it also debatable. Like in Indonesia, that secretly have. It is compulsory to write the identity. Someone could probably pay, but it has.
Putus-putus Pak Komar.
Mas Komar, mungkin tutup video dulu kali Mas. Suaranya keputus.
Yeah, connection is not good. And now we lost him.
Yeah, I was.
Shall we continue, Nina?
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, we don't have Prof. Komaruddin Hidayat here, so we will proceed to the next program, which is the presentation from the author of Why as a Muslim I Defend Liberty. And before his presentation, let me introduce Mustafa Akyol, even though some of you I know that you know who attended, especially who attended the earlier session, have known Mustafa Akyol. Mustafa Akyol is a Turkish journalist and author, and studied in political science and history at Bogazici University, and since early 2000 he has been writing a regular opinion column for Turkish publication like Hurriyet Daily News, and recently for the Middle East focus on almonitor.com, and since fall 2013 he is a regular contributing opinion writer for the New York Times, and he has published so many books, in Turkish, and then has been translated into Malay and Indonesian, and his arrest by religious police has led to the production of the book that we have discussed earlier, Reopening a Muslim Mind. And in February 2017, another book of Mr. Akyol, The Islamic Jesus, How the King of the Jews Became a Prophet of the Muslim, was published by St. Martin Press. And this book has received praise from the New York Times, Chicago Tribune, Publisher Weekly, The Economist, the National Catholic Reporter, and more. Yeah, and the book also not only published in English but also in Turkish and Croatian. Yeah, and he has spoken in many like hundreds of lectures and talks. Yeah, and including with us tonight. Yeah, and I cannot read all the things, but he has published 2 books, incredible, in 2020, 2 books, yeah, Reopening Muslim Mind and Why as a Muslim I Defend Liberty. So without further ado, I will give the opportunity for Mr. Mustafa Akyol to speak about his most recent book, yeah. Mustafa Akyol, time is yours, about 20 minutes. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. And thank you so much, Nina. Assalamu alaikum to you all, and thanks for joining us here. Salamat malam. I think that's the right way to say it in Indonesian. Good evening. As you see, my Indonesian is getting better and better every time, so I'm really but really thank you to everybody who's with us tonight for organizing this. It's an honor again to be able to speak about my work with our friends and colleagues in Indonesia, and of course there might be people from other parts of the world. Now, I published indeed 2 books in 1 year, and that is partly thanks to COVID, because when I was locked down during the COVID era, the Cato Institute, where I joined 3 years ago to work on these issues of Islam and freedom and human rights, they offered, I mean, why don't you put all your ideas in one accessible volume, ideas about freedom in particular, and let's publish that separately. And I said, okay, that's a good idea. And if you have read Reopening Muslim Minds, you would be aware that it's a book with a lot of theology and philosophy and a lot of argumentation from those perspectives. This one is a more simpler, shorter, accessible book. And also it covers other areas like politics of Islam, the economy of Islam, and the lost heritage of Islamic liberals from the 19th century, thinkers like Nama Kemal or Hayrettin Pasha. Because I think in late 19th century, I believe our intellectuals, Muslim intellectuals, looked into the world a bit more healthier than today, because they had admired Western democracies, but they were not yet colonized by the West, and that colonialization ultimately came later, which had destructive effects in many ways, including a very reactionary response to it, understandably so. But I think in the late 19th century, especially the Ottoman intellectuals of the 19th century, first of all, they were actually confident about the place of Muslims in the world, but they were also looking comparatively to the world, and they were admiring certain things they saw in France or England at the time in terms of constitutional government, freedom of speech, the right to freely criticize the government, which they didn't have yet at the time in the Ottoman Empire. And they brought those ideas, and that created the movement that we call Islamic liberalism. And Nama Kemal, for example, the Ottoman intellectual, he was the first one, as far as I know, who looked into democracy, found democracy as an admirable political system, and looked back into the Islamic tradition and noticed in the Quran there is a call for consultation, shura, among Muslims. And he took this as an inspiration for democracy, and he wrote about these ideas in his journal called Hurriyet, which is freedom, which was published partly in London because he was at some point in exile. So there was this interest in Western liberal democracies back there in the 19th century, which also led to rethinking some issues of fiqh or jurisprudence, which is the interpretation of Sharia in Islam as well. And in the book, I sometimes go back and forth between those 19th century Islamic liberals. And let's not forget, they were pious Muslims. When people speak about liberty, sometimes some Muslims have the misperception that, oh, people speak about liberty because they don't care about religion. They want to be free from religion. No, it's not the point. The point is we care about religion. That's why we're speaking about liberty, because we think religion deserves to be freely articulated and practiced, and that's the purest form of it. And if you actually violate liberty, if you deprive people from their God-given right to freedom, you are not you're not serving religion, although you may be thinking that you're serving. You're actually sometimes harming religion because you're making people hypocritical, or sometimes you make people reactionary against religion. Now, in the book, I actually tell this part in the beginning with a story. The first chapter begins with what is liberty? And I say, well, liberty, the dictionary definition is the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life, behavior, or political views. Now, this can come from different angles, right? Sometimes some people can oppress our liberty by saying, we are making you a good Muslim, right? So we are oppressing your liberty. I mean, they will not say that, but they will limit our choices. Or they can say, Islam is bad for you. I want to protect you from Islam, right? I want to make you secular. Communist dictatorships have done that. China is doing that to Uyghurs right now. Some secularists in France are intolerant. They want to ban the hijab, right? I mean, they already did ban the hijab in high schools in France, and some people even want to go forward. So I'm critical of both of these approaches, right? I mean, I'm critical of people who violate in the name of religion, and people who violate liberty in the name of saving people from religion, in their own worldview, and so on and so forth. And that has been very destructive throughout the 20th century, especially in the name of fascist or communist or other authoritarian ideologies. Now, but I said I begin the book with a story. Let me relate to that. It was 2013. I was in Riyadh for a conference. I've been to Saudi Arabia a few times for Umrah, alhamdulillah, but this was for a conference in Riyadh. And my hosts were gracious. It was about Middle East politics. And I was returning home from Riyadh to Istanbul. I took the Turkish Airlines flight. And of course, in Saudi Arabia, I don't know if it changed a little bit now, but every woman were covered by hijab or sometimes niqab, the face full veil. And they all boarded on the plane in that, dress code. And the plane left Riyadh and we got close to Istanbul, and a few of those ladies, I saw them walk back to probably the restroom in the plane, and they came out with very open dresses. I mean, incomparably different. And I saw this and I said, wow, I mean, they're not wearing hijab in Saudi Arabia because they believe in it, because they want to, because it's a religious obligation. Rather, they're wearing it because they are, forced by it to do that, and by the religion police, Mutawwa, famous or infamous Mutawwa in Saudi Arabia. Then I thought, so this means that in Saudi Arabia, when they are wearing the hijab, are they really doing this with ikhlas, with sincerity? Not really. And this is a famous thing in Turkey, because in Turkey, alcohol is free, bars are free. Everybody knows that Saudis or Iranians come to Turkey partly sometimes to enjoy these, hedonistic, ways of life and so on and so forth. And this is not to mean that, of course, every woman in Saudi Arabia or Iran are wearing hijab for those reasons. Not at all. I mean, a lot of Muslim ladies in the world, of course, wear hijab because they want to worship God and they see this as a requirement of Islam, and I have full respect and support, for their rights. But other Muslim women, make different interpretations, or maybe they're not coming from that perspective. They have a different way of life. Now, the point, and this is, and what the Saudis are achieving with forcing people to do this is not to make them more pious, more conservative. It's rather make them more hypocritical. This is actually quite obvious in Iran. Iran is known, I mean, a lot of studies have come out about the Iranian society in the past several years, and I've published some of them. I've written about some of them. Iranian society have become quite secular under the Iranian Republic, Islamic Republic, because people react to the regime, and their reaction ultimately turns into reaction towards Islam. Because the regime imposes hijab, or there's a movement to take off hijab. The regime bans alcohol, or people make alcohol in their homes, then sometimes they actually die because of it's a homemade, sort of alcoholic drink. And there are a lot of ex-Muslims leaving Islam, being reactionary against Islam, and some of them becoming Christians. And that is what the Iranian regime is achieving in the name of Islam by imposing Islam. Whereas I think the regime allowed people to be living their lives as they deem fit, it would be a much more healthier society. Now, the reason why we have countries like Saudi Arabia or Iran, and now the Taliban will do the same, of course, in Afghanistan, and they're beginning to do that, is that we have an interpretation of Islam that doesn't have a full respect to the value of human freedom. And in my book, I criticize this understanding, and I show that most of the time it's actually going against the Quran or minimizing the value of freedom that is highlighted in the Quran. And I show this with a discussion of a phrase we all know probably, La ikraha fid din, which is there's no compulsion in religion. You know, that is a verse in the Quran. It's actually the beginning of a verse in Baqarah 256. It's one of the most quoted, passages from the Quran. There is no compulsion in religion. But I quoted a Turkish imam in this book, a conservative one, and he says, a very conservative one, he says, no, there is compulsion in religion. There is no compulsion to religion, but there is compulsion in religion. What does it mean? Well, he means that there's no compulsion in religion only meant that people will not be forced to become Muslims if they're not already. Like if you're Jewish or Christian, you will not be forced to convert to Islam. But if you are Muslim, you will be coerced to practice the requirements of Islam. And this is a mainstream view. I mean, I said it's not unheard of. I mean, I said he actually put it in a good way. But I show in the book that this mainstream view doesn't really come from the Quran itself or from the practice of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, himself, but it's interpretation by scholars who lived at a different time. And I show how they understood the idea of the Quranic notion of Emr bil Maruf or Nahi anil Munkar, which means commending the right and forbidding the wrong as coercion, whereas it can be understood as proclamation of Islam or nasiha, which is advice or which is non-compulsory means. So we need a change here, I argue, because the result is it leads to authoritarian systems acting in the name of Islam, which doesn't even make people pious, but which makes people rather sometimes hypocritical and sometimes contemptful against our religion. And then I show something else. This discussion was made in Europe as well a few centuries ago. It was offered by John Locke. In the book, I go back and forth between John Locke a lot. He has, John Locke is historically known as the father of liberalism in the West. And again, people who didn't read John Locke may think that he was a secularist thinker. Not at all. John Locke was a Christian. He also has a book called The Reasonableness of Christianity. And when you read his important work, A Letter Concerning Toleration, he is criticizing Christians who exactly behave like our Taliban or the Iranian regime or the Saudi establishment today. Because at the time in the 17th century, Europe was in a very oppressive place. That's why Jews were often fleeing Europe and coming to the Ottoman Empire, because the Ottoman Empire was more free and tolerant. Europe was oppressive because there were different Christian kingdoms, Christian kings and princes, and they were imposing their version of Christianity on their populations. And there were also constant war between them. There was this dramatic, tragic 30 years war that destroyed big population of Europe. It was between the Protestants and Catholics. It was a sectarian war. And also people who had different ideas about Christianity were branded as heretics, and they were being punished, beheaded, burned at the stake. I mean, Christian fundamentalism was very, very oppressive. And John Locke, in his letter concerning toleration, criticizes these ideas and says, well, there's nothing in the Bible, there's nothing in what Jesus said which justifies this sort of oppression that you're doing. There's nothing like a Christian commonwealth, which is a Christian state or a theocracy. And he says, there are different Christians, there are different sects. Which one is the right one? And he says, God knows which one is the right one. So let's leave it to God and let's tolerate each other. And let the state be not the promoter of one sect of Christianity, but let the state just protect everybody's freedom and natural rights and property and peace in society. Let people follow their persuasions. And interestingly, John Locke referred positively to the Ottoman Empire, which at the time was more similar to this model. Because in the Ottoman Empire, there were Christians and Jews and Armenians and Catholics and different groups, and the Ottomans were not actually interfering much with their practices and allowing their religious traditions. Before John Locke, French philosopher, thinker, John Bodin, actually, he says, look at the great emperor of the empire of the Turks, which is, he means the Ottoman Empire. He says, there every man can live according to their conscience. So when Christianity was so oppressive, our Islamic world actually looked more liberal, more free, more tolerant. Unfortunately, what happened is that these liberal ideas evolved in the West, and there was a lot of wrong turns too: fascism, communism, and nationalism, white supremacism, a lot of dirty stories in Western history as well. But ultimately, the idea of religious freedom became more established in Western societies, and that's why Muslims live happily in Western societies today, right? I mean, when they go there, they can establish their mosques and have their practices, and they can. There are problems with France and French and secularism. I criticize certain parts of it, but in the UK or US or Canada, Muslims are happily practicing their religion, which was unthinkable a few centuries ago. Which is thanks to the ideas of freedom that became established in Western society. On the other hand, we, the Muslim societies, didn't become more liberal, but sometimes become less liberal, less tolerant. We lost some of the pluralism that we had. We lost some of the tolerance that we had, and the more rigid interpretations of Islam became globally established as the authentic Islam, and the Saudis have a big role in promoting their understanding, which is the most strict understanding. So this book is a critique of this scene in the Muslim world and calling fellow Muslims to rethink some of these issues. And it's an argument that to live in peace together and to be pious in the way we believe in, and in the pious that is really sincere, we need freedom first. In other words, we need freedom to be good Muslims in the way we understand. And some people will not be maybe the best Muslims, they will have a different way of life, but we have to respect that and we have to tolerate that. Otherwise, everyone will be oppressing each other with the true way of life and true way of thinking and the true sect and so on and so forth. The book also offers some discussions about the Sharia. I mean, as Nina, you were very right to mention the horrific incident in Pakistan. There were actually several incidents, but in Pakistan, there was a movement called the Islamization of laws under General Zia-ul Haq in the late 70s and early 80s. And, Pakistani laws were Islamized. And one of the things that was brought was the punishment for adultery, right? Zina, and stoning was introduced. But there was one very tragic mistake, and that is conceptually there was no Pakistanis didn't make a difference between rape and adultery. So adultery is known as zina in Islamic tradition. Rape was defined as zina bil jabr, that is adultery by force, right? Adultery by coercion. Now, when you do this, there was a loophole here. There was a big flaw there, and it led to horrific tragedies. What happened is that there have been women who have been unfortunately raped by some aggressive, terrible men in their villages, for example, in the remote parts of Pakistan. And once these women were raped, they got pregnant, and they went to a court and said that this man raped me, attacked me. And the court said, show us 4 witnesses. And there are no 4 witnesses. How can the woman find 4 witnesses? And then the court said, well, according to zina laws, you have to show 4 witnesses, otherwise you can't prove the rape. Okay, but you're pregnant, that shows you made zina, so you are punished for zina, stoning, for death by stoning. You have to be punished. So Zafran Bibi is a lady in Pakistan who's gone through this ordeal. Luckily, she wasn't stoned, and ultimately at a higher court stopped the case, but original verdict was like that, and she was in prison for a long time. And she was traumatized, of course, first being raped and then put into jail. Now, Where does this 4 witnesses idea come from? Well, it comes from the Quran, the Holy Quran, of course. But I make the argument in the book that there's a totally different story there, a totally different intention. The Quran brought the necessity of the 4 witnesses in cases of adultery, because what happened was there, the wife of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, Aisha, was falsely accused for adultery. So the Quran was defending Aisha against this libel, and brought the idea that, and brought the rule that if any woman is accused, anybody who accuses a woman for adultery should show 4 witnesses. So the intention of the Quran was to protect women from libels and from aggressive men and from being persecuted in society. But if you don't understand the intention, that's maqsad of the Quran and Islamic law, and you bring this idea that, you know, adultery is established by 4 witnesses, and you understand rape as nothing separate than 4 witnesses and adultery, you run into this horrific result of persecuting a woman who's already a rape victim, and which has happened in Pakistan lately. I mean, after all a lot of disputes in Pakistan, those laws were adopted to prevent this misapplication, but still there are terrible things happening in Pakistan, unfortunately, in the name of blasphemy laws, for example, and unconscientious examples. And my argument there is Sharia is a key value in Islam. We have to honor the Sharia, but applications of the Sharia is a human endeavor, and a lot of terrible things can be done in the name of Sharia. So no law should be sanctified saying this is Sharia, so you can't discuss. We have to see whether it really serves the intentions that the Sharia is built upon in the first place, which is the protection of the innocent, which is the protection of women, especially in oppressive societies. Also, I have a chapter. This is one face of the Sharia, if you will, discussions about the Sharia. I have another chapter, what we should revive from the Sharia. And there I show that in classical Islamic civilization, the Sharia also had an important function, and that is, as a law separate from the rulers, the Sharia constrained the rulers and prevented tyranny. Because it was a law about the sultans, so even if the sultan did something unjust, people could refer to the Sharia. And I begin with a story. It's an interesting story that Ottoman Sultan Mehmet II, the conqueror of Istanbul, once he conquered Istanbul, he ordered a Greek architect to build the Fatih Mosque in Istanbul. The architect did, the Sultan didn't like it, and the punished the architect, got his hands cut. You know, it's terrible, amputation, so it's terrible. But then the Greek architect went to a Sharia court, sued the Sultan, and the Sharia court called the Sultan and punished him, and gave him the punishment to compensate for the architect. And the Sultan had to listen because the justice was about the law. So the argument is, unfortunately, we Muslims, to some extent, lost the key value of the Sharia, which is a standard of justice about everyone else, all governments and rulers and presidents and prime ministers and kings and all of that. It's a higher law that is about everybody to uphold justice. That was the key value of the Sharia. And because of this blind literalism, by saying we're implementing the Sharia, terrible things have been done in countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and certainly in Afghanistan, in the 90s, and now there's a concern now it will happen again. In other words, this book goes through some of the important issues in Islam that is controversial in the modern world. I try to show that freedom is a value right there in the Quran, but maybe we Muslims didn't always cultivate it and respect it as we should have done. And we need to rethink some of these issues. And the reason I go to John Locke very often is that people like John Locke did the same thing in Christianity. And that's why Christians don't have inquisitions anymore that torture people, right? To save their souls. But they were doing that. Or crusaders, right? And of course, there are some Christian fundamentalists with fanatic ideas, but at least, institutionally, those things like the Inquisition or Crusades are some of the things of the past. And that's why Muslims can often live happily today in Christian majority societies without being, subject to coercion. And I think we are the religion that actually should have brought these ideas before, because some of those ideas are right there in the Quran. But religions take a step forward when they go through crisis, when they go through a difficult time. And I think it was not an accident that the crisis of the 17th century with religious violence and coercion pushed for ideas of freedom and toleration in Christianity, which was rediscovered, which was not unknown, but it was rediscovered from the roots of Christianity. And I think we are at a similar time in Islam that we have to cultivate and revive our values of freedom and toleration. And I show that, 19th century Ottoman liberals were already working on these issues, and there are some important ideas to get from them. So this is what I can say in 10 minutes or 20 minutes, sorry if I took too much time to summarize. But I mean, go and read this book. I mean, it's free. That's free downloadable as a PDF. I mean, as I can say, why as a Muslim I defend liberty at libertarianism.org, which is a project of the Cato Institute that I'm working at. And I would love to, of course, hear the comments and ideas from our friends today. And I'm honored by the audience here, by Dr. Ruhaini for joining us, and thanks to all of you.
Okay, thank you very much for your great presentation. I would like to summarize some of your important points in Indonesian language for us. Jadi tadi beberapa poin yang disampaikan oleh penulis, yaitu bahwa kadang-kadang kan kata liberal itu sering dikonotasikan negatif. Padahal mereka-mereka yang liberal thinker itu adalah mereka-mereka yang sangat perhatian terhadap agama, dan mereka itu adalah orang-orang yang soleh gitu. Dan yang inti dari penulisan buku ini diantaranya adalah bahwa jangan sampai ketidakpahaman terhadap suatu masalah itu kemudian menjadikan suatu negara ataupun pemegang kebijakan itu mengeluarkan kebijakan yang kontraproduktif, ya, seperti misalnya kaum sekularis menganggap bahwa hijab itu oppressing, jadi mengambil kebebasan orang-orang Muslim untuk memilih pakaiannya, sehingga kemudian justru mereka mengeluarkan kebijakan yang melarang hijab gitu ya, misalnya di Prancis ya, dan itu sebetulnya kontraproduktif. Itu justru mengambil kebebasan para perempuan Muslim untuk berjilbab, tapi juga bukan berarti dipaksa seperti di Iran ketika Khomeini memenangkan kekuasaan, ya, di mana di situ dikiranya perempuan itu maunya diwajibkan untuk berhijab gitu ya, dan itu diberlakukan ya di Arab dan di Iran. Dan itu kebalikan misalnya ya di Turki yang dilarang berhijab, padahal yang diinginkan oleh perempuan itu bukan harus diwajibkan berhijab ataupun dilarang berhijab, tapi kebebasan untuk memilih bisa berhijab atau tidak berhijab. Kebebasan itu yang ingin diperjuangkan gitu ya. Karena memang oke. Kemudian poin yang selanjutnya adalah tentang la ikraha fiddin, ya. Jadi tadi dijelaskan sedikit hipokrisi dalam pemaknaan dari la ikraha fiddin itu, karena dikatakan bahwa memang tidak ada paksaan untuk masuk Islam kalau misalnya tidak siap, tapi kemudian ada paksaan gitu ya ketika orang sudah masuk Islam, yaitu harus menjalankan apa-apa yang diharuskan di dalam Islam gitu ya. Dan dia juga karena dia memang defender of liberty gitu ya, pendukung kebebasan, maka dia mengkritik tentang otoriternya penguasa misalnya, dan dia merujuk misalnya John Locke ya, dan juga Montesquieu ya, tentang pembagian kekuasaan, dan dia mengatakan bahwa dan John Locke itu adalah seorang Kristen, dan John Locke juga sama mengkritik para kaum fundamentalis Kristen yang juga opresif dengan menggunakan atas nama agama, dan John Locke juga mempromosikan toleransi gitu ya, jangan sampai merasa semua orang ini aku yang paling benar gitu, tapi toleran terhadap perbedaan gitu ya. Nah, kemudian dia juga mengkritik interpretasi agama yang kaku ya, seperti di Saudi Arabia ya, dan tentu saja dia ingin ya orang tuh memiliki kebebasan, sehingga kemudian keberagamaan itu didasarkan pada sincerity, keikhlasan gitu ya untuk beragama. Selanjutnya poin ke-8 yang saya tulis itu dia juga mendiskusikan tentang syariah ya, islamisasi hukum yang dilaksanakan di Pakistan, yang tadi saya di pembukaan sudah sebutkan kasusnya Zafran Bibi. Jadi dia itu perempuan yang suaminya dipenjara dan kemudian diperkosa, tapi ketika lapor ke polisi justru dia itu yang dituduh berzina karena dia hamil ya. Adik mohon maaf ini kok ada berisik. Dan akhirnya tapi kemudian terselamatkan oleh adanya para pendukung human rights ya terhadap apa yang dilakukan oleh Zafran Bibi itu. Gitu. Kalau tidak ada solidaritas dari yang lain, mungkin dia sudah menjadi korban perajaman ya, bersama padahal dia punya anak kecil gitu ya. Dan dia juga bercerita ya, saya senang di bagian bukunya itu banyak cerita tentang bagaimana syariah itu ketika pada masa lalu itu di atas segalanya, di atas kekuasaan penguasa. Dia ceritakan tentang kasus sultan yang namanya Al-Fatih, yang dia minta untuk dibangunkan masjid dan dibangunkan masjid, tapi yang salahnya itu cuma satu aja, bahwa kubahnya itu berada di posisi lebih rendah daripada Hagia Sophia, dan karena satu hal itu, para masjid itu begitu bagus gitu ya, karena soal itulah maka kemudian si raja itu tanpa beribu lagi dia memotong arsitek ya, tangan kedua arsitek ini, dan arsitek ini mengadu kepada hakim, dan kemudian hakim memanggil Al-Fatih dan kemudian disidang, dan dari hasil sidang itu Al-Fatih dinyatakan bersalah dan kemudian diberikan hukuman ya, berupa dia tuh harus memberikan kompensasi berupa uang untuk membesarkan anak-anak si arsitek ini. Dan ini menunjukkan bahwa di situ tidak ada penguasa yang bisa lepas untuk tidak dihukum karena kesalahannya. Dan ini berbeda sekali dengan fenomena sekarang, di mana penguasa itu seolah-olah dia di atas syariah, dan tidak boleh dia terlihat salah. Dan dia komparasikan misalnya dengan Prime Ministernya Norwegia yang kemudian ditangkap oleh polisi karena dia itu melanggar social distancing gitu ya. Itu karena yang kuat itu adalah hukum gitu. Di situ memperlihatkan pentingnya distribusi kekuasaan, sehingga kemudian orang tidak otoriter gitu ya. Dan kemudian saya kira itu ya isu-isu pentingnya. Sekarang saya akan berpindah ke program yang selanjutnya. The next presentation will be from our discussant, Professor Siti Ruhaini Dzuhayatin. As you might have seen in the flyer for this event, she is a professor in human rights and gender studies, a lecturer at the State Islamic University UIN Sunan Kalijaga, Yogyakarta, also a chairperson of the Independent Permanent Human Rights Commission, and also the commissioner and the leader in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in 2012 until 2014, and she is currently a senior advisor on human rights and religious affairs to the Executive Office of President of Indonesia until 2024. Professor Siti Ruhaini Dzuhayatin, time is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Nina. And I think because the event is informal and around friends and colleagues. So maybe I will just call Mbak Nina. And also I'm grateful to be here on the invitations of CakNurian urban Sufism, and also with my inspiring mentor, Professor Komaruddin Hidayat. And I'm so glad surrounded by good friends here, Sadra Prihatin, Mas Adi, and also senior. And I would like also in a very special appreciations to our senior. He is the Chief Marshal Cepi Hakim. He is with us. He used to be the Chief Commander of Air Force in Indonesia, and also I noticed also mentor and senior Mbak Nur Sahbani, Mbak Julia Surya Kusuma, and also Mbak Liz Marcus, and also colleagues. So this is also I'm honored to receive invitations to talk or to discuss about I think even though Brother Mustafa said that this is actually very light book, but I think this is still very challenging and also inspiring book that worth to discuss tonight. And as I read through your books amidst the very hectic agenda approaching the end of the year in the office of the executive office of the president. So I'm so grateful to have this book circulated freely, and thank you very much for this your sincere donations to the Ummah, to the Muslim throughout the world. And I think it will be enlightening, and also it will also become our new thought in Islamic in Islamic work in the academic as well as in the popular circulation. So Brother Mustafa, thank you very much for this. And I think as I went through the books, I don't think that I have major criticism to the books, but instead I'm actually conquer all of what you discuss in the book, and also your presentation tonight. So what I'm doing now is actually just adding to a framework. When you said that I'm a Muslim and why I defend liberty, so I pose the following question of why liberty does not flourish in the Muslim world. So I think this is just the further questions to be discussed tonight. Why liberty does not really flourish as we wish. Yeah. So from your explanations, I think we have to think. One is actually how Islam engage in the politics in the modern Muslim world, and how it's evolved from the basic from the basic of the social entity, what is called Ummah. So this one is actually the center of your discussion of the book. And tonight I would like to go further in providing the framework that I take from, of course, very famous thinker, very Islamic thinker Ibn Khaldun on the Tamadun, and also combines with a theory of civilization from Robert Elias, because they have really in common in understandings how the society evolved from the communality. And that is actually the issue why then liberty does not flourish as we wish today, and also your expectation in your books. So first of all, we have to to understand the basic entity of Ummah. Ummah is actually the ethno-religious communality, and Ummah is like other religious communality. It has very specific characteristics of being a homogeneous in terms of ethnicity, in terms of religion, in terms of economics engagements, and also it then bound together as an identity, and the exclusive identity with mechanic solidarity, and sometimes this is also the source of sentiment and militancy. So that is actually the very basic of Ummah from their sociological and anthropological perspective. And I think around this entity and the transformations of this entity into what you call the society is quite problematic in the Islamic world. One is the modern. I think modernity become problematic in most of the Muslim world, because I think unlike in Europe, where modernity is kind of internal reform and internal mental transformations, modernity in a Muslim world is coupled with the struggles against colonialization. So I concur with your explanation on how Europe's evolved from their ethnocentrism, so ethno-religious centrism to modern society. But of course, we have to also be very critical as well to the Europe and the West, because the nationhood that they built upon the modernity, then it's become also fascism and colonialism, and it's really create a great suffrage in the Muslim world. So we are talking about when we are talking about liberty. In fact, we are talking about how modernity evolves in a certain society and in a certain worlds like the Muslim world. So, so I think, as I mentioned earlier, that it's about how the Ummah as the ethno-religious entity then transforming into the concept of modern nation state. This is actually the core issue why then liberty doesn't really develop as we wish. So in one point, when modernity came to the Muslim world, in the same time that we have to the Muslim were mostly their struggles against colonialization, and they struggle for the independent. And the independent as an independent state and independent nation. And the path is not always the same towards the Muslim world, as also you mentioned earlier. One possibility is that they succeeded in removing colonialization, but they then return against to what they had in the past. That is a state based on the ethno-religious communality. Most of the Middle East countries are actually formed or established based on such ethno-religious communality. Yeah. And the second is the revolution, and also the political transformations into a republic, as nation state based on republic, like for example Turkey, Indonesia, and Egypt, and so forth. But again, the process is somehow is not following the theory of modernity that we have in many academic books, and also what has been exercised in the West, because the sentiment is still there. Because why then the religious sentiment remains, because again, Islam was used in the Muslim world as their spirits to struggle against colonials, who were associated with Christianity. So that is actually the big obstacle why then it is not possible to transform, to have the mental transformation from the Islamic militancy or Islamic sentiments to fully transform into public ethics and public virtue and in the modern nation state. Not all Muslim worlds they are able to transform this. Indonesia, for example, we are trying actually to transform this from the ethnocentrism to the modern nation state. So I would then in the end I would like also to reflect on the Indonesian experience, how we actually trying very hard so that we have to maintain this multicultural and also pluralist modern state. So I will continue on how the obstacles of the Muslim in transforming Islam to the modern ethics and also to the modern society. So mainly because all the Muslim states and have been undergoing physical modernization, but they're not they were not undergoing mental transformations to what is called modern society. And what is remain is actually the charismatic leaders, the charismatic leadership, the political charismatic leadership and religious leadership, and they all together joining this in what they call defending the identity, defending the Islam as their own identity, and Islam as the basis of the new nations. So that is actually the obstacle on why then liberty, the door for liberty is not widely open in some of the Muslim worlds. And the second, if on the countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, and others, they are moving moving into the nation state. But if we learn about the history of Pakistan and Bangladesh, it reflects entirely how ethno-religious sentiment is actually breaking down the states of India into three countries, into states. One is Pashtun, is the Pakistan, and then Bengali is Bangladesh. So this is actually, if you may say, the failure of the transformations of Islamic nation, as you mentioned earlier, to the public norm and to public virtue. So the breakdown of India is actually this is actually the case. The case that's reflect such a difficult situation in the Muslim world. And recently also we witnessed what's happening in Afghanistan. I'm assigned by the executive office of the president as being the member of the Afghan Indonesia Solidarity Network. And we are trying actually to work with our sisters and brothers in Afghanistan, including the Taliban, because we also invited the Taliban to Indonesia to talk about establishing the future of nationhood. Is really the nationhood that is very important to establish before then the state then is running. So what is lacking in Afghanistan is actually the sense of having a nation. Yeah. Because a nation has to be come from a very amicable consensus, as we then release some of our ethno-religious identity into much wider identity that is called a nation. So the absence of nationhood in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, then it's become also the problems of establishing a state. So that is actually all the arguments that you mentioning in the books on how liberty is very difficult to maintain and very difficult to mainstream in some of the Muslim books. And now I will shift a bit to the Indonesian experience on how Indonesia, and also maybe you may also add what's happening in Turkey, because I think that Indonesia and Turkey has to be together actually to promote the modern and also the democratic Muslim country in the world with the Wasatiyat Islam and Islam moderate Islam. I think it will be the future of Islam in the future. So Indonesia, you may also aware, Brother Mustafa, that Indonesia is actually very diverse country. So it's we claims that we consist of 700 small ethnicities in some of, I think, to 120 something major ethno-religious, mostly ethno-religious commonality. And before we declare our independence, our state independence, so there was a declaration of nationhood in Indonesia in 28th of October 1928. So this is it's called the pledge of Indonesian youth. We declare that we observe one nation, one language in that time, and it's built upon the various ethno-religious commonalities that we have in the archipelago. So that is actually the modality of Indonesia to have the civic supremacy. This is not political supremacy. This is the civic supremacy that we can share. What is the understandings of rights? What is the understanding of freedoms? What is the understanding of liberty? So that is actually the modality that Indonesian nations have before declaring the political power state in 17th of August 1945. Then we transform some, it's not all, some of the modality, some of the nation modality to the state, but it's not all that we give to the states. Yeah, so that is why this Indonesia still has space that we exercise in much more civic manner than other maybe other Muslim countries. For example, not all fiqh and Sharia is adopted as our national laws. We only give some authority to the states to govern our Islam. So that is where then we still have space, we still have civic space where we can negotiate all the freedoms. For example, freedom of religion, freedom of observing different sect, different madhab, different mazahib is there. Is in the civic space, which is not really fully governed by the government. Of course, we are now also suffering from the emergence of populist movement, which try actually to promote superiority of ethno-religious, but still our civic space allow us actually to defend this. As also you mentioned in the book, that Indonesia is also having suffering from their control of Islamic groups to force some of their Islamic values and Islamic way of life in a certain part of Indonesia. But still, we are trying so hard to maintain that our civic space is still there, so that things that should be managed by the ummah, not by the state, is still there. For example, the veil. The veil is actually, this is a personal and communal issue. Freedom of religion is communal issue. So it is why it is still acceptable in Indonesia that someone will change their religion in a peaceful manner. Of course, some experience social pressure, but I think those who are in this forum is part of the human rights, fundamental right defender, to say that it's supposed to be not the issue of state control and state policy on the changing of religion. So so I will end here that my conclusion is that we have to advocate for the internal transformations of the Muslim ummah. For us, as you mentioned earlier, that there is a space for differences, and it can be achieved when there is a mental transformation from the ethno-religious communalities into a certain modern nation society based on citizenship. So this is actually the challenge that had for most of the Muslim world, and we hope that Indonesia will survive on that, and also Turkey. Thank you very much. I'll get back the times to Sister Nina. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mbak Eni, for your comments and discussions. Tadi I will speak a little bit about what her point in Indonesia, even though this is for you, Brother Mustafa Akyol. Jadi Mbak Eni tidak punya kritik ya terhadap bukunya Akyol, dan dia justru meng-highlight halangan-halangan yang bisa membuat Muslim itu mendapatkan kebebasan itu, diantaranya yaitu dalam hal mentransformasikan nilai-nilai kebebasan ini di dalam etika modern ya, diantaranya karena adanya pemimpin yang karismatik, kemudian juga yang kedua adalah adanya sentimen etnis agama gitu ya. Dalam kasus misalnya India, kemudian Afghanistan sekarang, dan terakhir dia berbicara tentang pengalaman Indonesia yang sangat beragam. Baik, we need much time for discussion. There is a question in the chat from Professor Muhammad Subandi. Thank you for coming. He is my fellow from the State Islamic University in Bandung. Maybe you have already read it, but his question is, he asks about what about the Quran, the Quranic verse that mention ku anfusakum ahlikum naron. But I don't really understand what he means in relation to the liberty. Perhaps you would like to speak directly, Professor Subandi. Time is yours. 2 minutes, please. Or have you understood the question, Brother Mustafa Akyol? The question that is being written in the chat.
Yeah, it's about the family. There's also the word daraba, and several things are being asked there. First of all, let me thank Professor Ruhaini for her very thoughtful, commentary from a perspective of social sciences and political science and Islamic, of course, background as well. It's true. I mean, the conceptualization of politics as an ummah, as an ethno-religious group with supremacy over others. So that's with conquest and being the ruling group over others who are tolerated. So that's our history. So but the whole world was like that at the time. I think we should understand the historicity of our tradition. Yes, Islamic empires expanded and did conquests and established Islam through the military power and everything. The Byzantine Empire did the same thing. The Sassanid Empire did the same thing. And for their time, the Islamic empires were actually relatively often more tolerant. But we should understand the historicity of our tradition. That's why in one chapter I discuss how to form a state through conquest or through social contract. And the social contract idea is also rooted in our tradition. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, made a political contract with the tribes in Medina, Jewish tribes in Medina. So there are also grounds for that as a source of inspiration. But yes, establishing a state where people are equal under the law, regardless of their beliefs, regardless of their madhab, of their religion, whether they, according to your theology, they are heretics, still they're equal citizens. So establishing that is the key thing. That, of course, also charismatic leadership of the, and a chapter in my book also deals with that. Should Muslims obey somebody? Like the word, are there leaders, ulul amr, that we have to obey now, or was that just a temporary commandment during the time of the Prophet Muhammad? I discussed that in the book as well. Yeah, these are fundamental underlying issues, because when you have that perception of the world where you belong to a group that has to be supreme and that has to have power and that may tolerate or not others, but from a position of power and supremacy, that leads to some of these problems. And of course, men are about women, so there's a hierarchical understanding of humanity versus an egalitarian with equal rights. So that's the key issue, and it is indeed, a big transformation. One problem of us is, as again Dr. Ruhaini said, is that is modernity came to us through colonialism most of the time, and that naturally made everything much more difficult, right? That's why it is interesting. I work on Ottoman liberalism a little bit, because Ottoman Empire was never colonized. So it actually Ottoman Empire had a healthier engagement with the West. Then came the whole Islamist movement, Ikhwan Muslimin, and all the Islamist movement that brought us to some of the issues today. They came out of a colonized Middle East, right? And it was brutal colonization by the French, by the British, and so on and so forth. And we have all the right to condemn and criticize European colonialism for the misdeeds that they have done. First, by the actual destruction on the ground, plus by leaving us scarred and reactionary and not being able to. But we have to overcome this, and we should be able to see the success of liberal democracy in the West aside from the colonial problem. And let's not forget that colonialism was defeated in the West, or criticized in the West, again thanks to liberal democracy and freedom and human rights. And so I think we should be able to have a clear vision there, and that's one thing I discuss in the book. Now, coming to a question, how about these issues in the Quran about educating your family, telling your family, like by freedom, I don't mean that there's no family structure and parents don't have a right and obligation to educate their children. There are clauses about that, certainly in our tradition, and it's only normal. And people have the right to raise their children, educate them, do nasiha, you know. But do you beat your children if they don't pray? You know, that's a different thing. That's one saying there, which I don't think necessarily is authentic. So what are the methods you use? By freedom, I don't mean not caring about how society goes. We have the moral obligation to be exemplars. We have the moral obligation to, especially for our family, to sustain certain values, educate our children. We have the obligation, wife and husband, they have obligations towards each other. Those things are there. But what are the methods are we using? Are we using coercion? Are we using violence? And those things should not be, I think, a part of this education and family structure. And regarding the some of the verses in the Quran about women, well, we should not forget that the Quran legislated in a social context. The Quranic legislation took place in an environment. One example is slavery. There were slaves in 7th century Arabia, and the Quran encouraged liberation of slaves, praised freeing a neck as a pious act, and Muslims could have taken this as the abolition of the institution, but Muslims didn't abolish the institution until the 19th century, even in the 20th century in certain parts of the world. Now, does this mean, and you can look into the Quran, and while the Quran encourages slavery, you can also find a verse which arranges slavery in a way that still sustains the institution. Now, does this mean slavery is an integral part of Islam? No. Today, most of us, alhamdulillah, have come to the recognition that it was just a historical institution which happened to exist when Islam came, and Islam actually improved the conditions of the slaves with the intention of abolishing the institution in the long run. I think we have to understand the same thing for women. For example, the Quran on family law gives women half of the share in inheritance, right? That's clear, a verse in the Quran, and that's been used as the basis of a inheritance law in Arab countries. I don't know the situation in Indonesia, but in almost all Arab countries, women get half of the share in inheritance. Now, Fazlur Rahman had a very important interpretation here. And he said, well, the Quran legislated in a social structure where men were by definition responsible for the family, and men were always taking care of women. So giving women half of the share was actually quite generous thing for that woman, because men were the people who were responsible. But in a different social structure, are we going to do the same thing, or can we bring egalitarian law? I think we can bring egalitarian law. Even polygamy. I mean, we can say that the Quran encourages monogamy, but you can also read the Quran as a text that justifies polygamy, as our tradition has understood. But I'll tell you one thing. There was a very good rationale for polygamy in 7th century Arabia. And that was, there were constant wars between tribes. There was always shortage of men. Men were killing each other. I mean, male population was much less than the female population. Maybe much of human history was like that because of the constant warfare, and war was by nature a male business. Now in a modern society where, I mean, we don't live in a world like that anymore, and the populations are equal, and I think there's no moral justification to advocate for polygamy. Oh, you can say, oh, but it's there in the Quran. I find the verse. Well, the Quran legislated in a context, and in that context, it uplifted women, it uplifted slaves, it brought justice, it brought advancement of rights, but we are in a very different context, and we should see that different, I think, a different context. Okay, so the person who asked the question, Muhammad, and
there are three more questions.
Discussions of whether the word daraba means hitting or separating. I mean, what certain words mean in 7th century Arabian context. I mean, endless discussions are there. I think basically the Quran uplifted women and gave them new rights in its own context, and we should continue uplifting women and give them equal rights in the modern context.
Okay, there are three more. There are three questions. I would like to read it because some of them are in Indonesian. First, I will read it all first. First from Budi Darmawan, he asks a question to you whether the background of your writing a book is the development of Turkish politics under Erdogan. So that's from Budi Darmawan, and then from Pamela Cardinale, seeing the fact that Christians have also experienced unjust things or implementation that are not following the concept of liberty, then according to Prof. Akyol, what can we learn so that Islam also move on to more civilized things like Christian? And the last question from Muhammad Ihsanuddin, is there any violation or to liberty in the history of Usmani politics? Ottoman politics, yeah. So that's three questions from you. Would you like to answer that? Or
Sure,
yeah, please.
Sure. And if I forget one of the questions in the middle, please remind me later. And
Yes,
the
yes,
first
yes,
question,
yes. Yeah. Okay. About
the first question was on Turkey.
The Muslim to move on, yeah, like Christian.
Okay, let me begin with the Turkey one because also Professor Ruhaini referred to Turkey, my country, and I should say this: Turkey has a very valuable Islamic tradition, including scholarship. We have ilahiyat faculties. Turkish theologians, I think, have built a valuable intellectual tradition, partly built on the Hanafi Maturidi tradition in Sunni Islam, which is the most flexible, let's say, of Sunni jurisprudence and theology. Also with some modern influences. For example, Fazlur Rahman has been highly revered by some Turkish theologians. Fazlur Rahman was, of course, the Pakistani scholar who brought a new modern interpretation to some of the Islamic issues. And I would be in favor of more engagement with the intelligentsia in Indonesia and Turkey on these Islamic issues. I think Turkey has something to say. Also, I think Turkey is an example of how a Muslim society can remain Muslim and not lose its faith under a secular government. I mean, Turkey is a secular state for a century by now, and people who visit Turkey sometimes say more people fast in Ramadan in Turkey, in Istanbul, than Tehran, because the fact that the government is Islamic doesn't make the society necessarily more Islamic. I mean, Turkey has been able to build institutions, civil institutions, without the state being Islamic necessarily. So you don't need an Islamic state to have a healthy Muslim society. So I think Turkey can be an example for that. However, Turkey has been going through a very bitter polarization in the past 10 years. President Erdogan, who's mentioned today in one of the questions, he emerged as a historic leader of religious conservatives, which were pushed aside from politics and power centers for a century almost by the people we call Atatürkists or Kemalists, the followers of Turkey's secularist founder. And Turkish politics has unfortunately been characterized by the supporters of Atatürk and supporters of Erdogan and very bitter political struggles between them. I believe Turkey should mature from this bitter division and come to a national consensus where everybody is respected and everybody, regardless of their political views, are considered as first-class citizens. Turkey is not at that point yet. Unfortunately, Turkish politics has become very polarized. Government has acted quite authoritarian in the past 5 years in response to some of the challenges, but very authoritarian. And Turkey's, unfortunately, ranks in human rights and freedoms have gone down dramatically. So Turkey politically is not in a good state right now. And I hope Turkey will overcome this turbulence and come to a society where nobody is the enemy within, nobody is a traitor because of his ideas and views. We're not there yet. Maybe we'll be there after the next election, or maybe in 2 elections terms. The good thing is still Turkey is an electoral democracy, so elections still matter. Elections can change governments. That's important. You don't have that in Egypt, probably, or Saudi Arabia, or even Iran, which claims to be a democracy. So I'm hopeful in the long run, but this is a difficult time. But this doesn't stop from engaging with Turkish academia, intelligentsia, and I think there's a valuable tradition there. And I would only be happy to see more engagement with the Indonesian scene. I myself learn a lot from Turkish academics, scholars, theologians, and sometimes actually bring these ideas to the more international scene. So this was the first question. The other one was, sorry, I missed it. I always forget when I get a few questions.
The first one is whether the first one actually whether the current condition of Turkey is under the Erdogan, which lead you to the writing of this book, whether your book's writing is because of the political situation in the Turkey. So that's the first question actually. And the second question that you seeing the Christian experience, this is from Pamela, whether we can learn in order Islam can move on to more civilized things like Christian.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I mean, my books are not too much about Turkey itself. I mean, but in this book, Why I Defend Liberty, you will see references to the late Ottoman Empire and Ottoman liberals. There are a few critical things about, actually, honestly, about Turkey under both Atatürk and Erdogan. Because in one of the chapters, the chapter on Sharia, what we should revive from the Sharia, I emphasize that the great blessing of the Sharia for the Islamic civilization was what the Western tradition calls separation of powers. The judiciary was not an arm of the executive. And legislation, fiqh, lawmaking was not a function of the state and government. So in classical Islam, that's why you had the Sharia as something separate from the rulers, and also the qadi, the judges, according to time and context, but generally separate from the rulers. So the rulers were constrained by power, by rule of law. And so Islam had what the Western tradition calls rule of law already from, in the classical era. What happened in the modern era is that because of modernization, a bad modernization, all these powers of legislation, judiciary, and executive got united under one umbrella. Atatürk founded Turkey in a way that the judiciary was under Atatürk, the legislation was under Atatürk, and executive was him as well. I mean, so it was, his motto was the unity of powers, which I'm critical of, right? I mean, that leads to authoritarian rule. And unfortunately, not officially, but de facto, Turkey is today, again, looking like that. President Erdogan has huge control over the judiciary and legislation and the whole executive. So his ideology and worldview is different from Atatürk, but it's still the same model of this one great leader controlling everything. And I'm critical of both of these models. And I believe there should be separation of powers. Now, separation of powers is a liberal idea. If you read liberal history, it was established by Montesquieu. My argument is that, and today what we call liberalism politically is mostly, the number one thing is separation of powers. The executive, the legislation, and the judiciary should be three different things. When European Union criticizes Turkey for decades, they always say separation of powers. And my argument is, well, separation of powers is also an Islamic value that we lost. We should, by our historic references, establish a strong sense of separation of powers. So the people who make the laws, who execute them, and who judge people by the laws should be different people, so they can be, controlling the excesses of each other's. And this is one example of my arguments in this book, which is about looking into modern liberal democracy and seeing some of the values there and connecting them to what we already had in the Islamic tradition. But you have to update that. I mean, you cannot just tell the stories of sultans being judged by, or you can just tell the story. I mean, one thing we do is sometimes is we tell these romantic stories of Caliph Umar, radiallahu anh, he was so pious and just, and which is true. But, when you tell that story and come back to politics today, it doesn't become necessarily a very good functioning just state. You have to develop the idea and institutionalize it and protect it by constitutional guarantees And for that, you need to learn from and benefit from the Western tradition as well, because let's face it, I mean, liberal democracy evolved in the West. Otherwise, what? Well, you can look into China, you will not get very good ideas or you can look into Russia, again, Putinism, you will not get very good ideas. So that's what I can say. And so I'm kind of going back forth between classical liberal tradition and Islamic tradition to find the commonalities. That is true for free market economy, rule of law, private property, and I also show that our great Islamic civilization was at its best 1,000 years ago when it was more diverse, more open. It had more free speech compared to Europe. We had institutions like Mejlis al-Munazara, Salon of Debate. Abbasid caliphs welcomed Christian theologians and Muslims to speak freely against each other without persecuting the Christians, which was an unthinkably open thing today for its time. Today, you would have those debates in Oxford, but try to have it in Pakistan publicly, someone will come and charge you for blasphemy. So we lost some of the values that we had, and those values developed somewhere else. So does this answer the questions? Again, I don't know, like, did I lost the track of questions?
I think it's answered the questions. We have over the time for 5 minutes, but as you mentioned that you would like to stay maximum 15 minutes until
let's make it 20. Okay, inshallah.
Yes, and there is one question for Mbak Eni. So I will. I don't know whether you would like to have a closing statement first, Mustafa Akyol, or you would like. Okay, I will let Mbak Eni first to answer the question. Yeah, I would like to read the question from Irwan Habsyah to Mbak Eni. Indonesia, in principle, is a united plural nation state, but it also allows a province to practice the Sharia laws, which limited religious freedom also for the Muslim. So, what is your opinion about this, Professor Ruhaini? Maybe about 4 minutes, Mbak Eni, and then both of you can have a closing statement, and then we close the session. Thank you.
Okay. So I think this is very factual questions, Brother Mustafa, that we are talking about the ideal things that we aiming to achieve, and but unfortunately, of course, there are obstacles and there are problems. In Indonesia, for example, as the question forwarded to me about a province called Aceh that now giving a privilege by the Indonesian government to practice Sharia as their local regulations. Of course, this is a challenge for us, but sometimes we have to negotiate with a political interest in order to keep the unifications at work. So that is actually the question. But the central government is always trying to minimize the effects of the implementations of Sharia by encouraging and also ensuring that the implementation of Sharia is in accordance with the Constitution. So and we of course political interest has to be also coupled with intellectuals exercise, and we encourage also colleagues in Aceh mainly in their Islamic university to continue workings on how to keep the understanding of Sharia in that province as often as possible, considering the national legislation and the national law. So that is actually a challenge, but their implementation of Sharia is their outcomes of the MOU between the faction in Aceh and the Indonesian government. So yes, we acknowledge that there is a challenge, but we are trying to always arrive in the consensus that Sharia, Indonesian Sharia has to be opened, and Indonesian Sharia has to also absorb the inclusive characteristic of the Indonesian society. So I think this is the answer to the questions, and I don't know, maybe I should also make the closing statement.
Yes, please, 1 minute.
So I think once again, I'm very grateful to be able to involve in this discussion, and thank you very much, Brother Mustafa, for your sincere donation of intellectual exercise and your thoughts. I think this is it will be the basic and the basis, and also it will be kind of the considerations and also adding to our aims in defending the basic principles of Islam that we believe, and this is branched by the Quran, and emancipating and sort of liberating humankind for the betterment of their lives, including also women and also the vulnerables and marginalized groups. And I think both Turkey and Indonesia can be kind of the modality for their Muslim society to bring the Islamic principle in the contributions of the global and the universal values enshrined in UN chapter, and also in the human rights, international universal declaration of human rights. So I think this is my hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mbak Eni. We have still 4 minutes left for you, Brother Mustafa Akyol, to have closing statement, but also to answer one final question from Dita Sarjono. Let me read her question. On the liberty in economics, my perception on reading your book is that you don't agree with centralized state distribution of wealth. So what is your suggestion on encouraging the civic society to be more charitable? People has potential or tendency of greediness and hoarding wealth. So like in the UK, for example, it eventually leads to individual subjective consideration in determining that someone is deserving or not deserving of charity rather than based on justice or other, often as an excuse for not giving to the poor or vulnerable. Please, time is yours to answer that question and for the closing statement.
Thank you. I mean, first of all, I'm once again honored by Professor Ruhaini for joining us and for her comments. I heard a lot of great thoughts and important points from her, so I really appreciate that. I'm honored by her interest in my work as well. And thanks for everyone for joining. And it wasn't asked to me, but on the Aceh province, which was mentioned, here, of course, I respect the institutions and laws of Indonesia. I'm not going to advise, but I believe it's wiser not to impose Islam through institutions like religion police. It's better to leave it to people's conscience and do nasiha and advice. I think that's the right way. If you start beating people because, I don't know, they drink wine or this and that, you don't really create a pious society. You just create hypocrisy. You just create a bad image of Islam. And people wonder, like, I mean, I see news about Aceh all the time in British media and American media, like people are being flogged and all that. Like, I mean, if we believe Islam is true, why do we impose it, right? If people are Islam is true, people will be enchanted by it. We just have to represent it. I think by example, we will by exemplifying the morals of Islam, we will do a greater service to our faith, rather than trying to force it people with, sticks are in our hand. Regarding economics, I mean, my chapter on economics will be an example there. I don't believe in this big redistributive states, which leads to socialist economies, which stagnate. I mean, we've seen that throughout the 20th century. I don't believe in a ruthless capitalism either. I believe in what our tradition had, which is a system of free market economics, which is entrepreneurship, in which also culminating wealth doesn't necessarily, you'll just sit on that wealth. I mean, people who are wealthy, if they invest that into the economy and build new businesses, that's also good for whole society. But still, you need charity. You need to take care of the people who are not fortunate enough. You have to support all segments of society. And for that, our tradition was the waqf, the foundations. And those foundations have been incredibly functional in classical Islam. In classical Islam, hospitals, charities, soup kitchens, schools, madrasas were founded by the foundations. And if you take all of that and give it to the state, it leads to stagnant bureaucracies, it leads to corruption, and it's not actually as efficient as the foundations are. So I believe in a charitable, compassionate, free market economy, which I believe has worked well in the Western societies, and which used to be our tradition, our economic tradition as well. I believe ideas of Islamic socialism, which appeared in the past 60, 70 years, have not been productive. In the Arab world, it led to corrupt and authoritarian republics. And they're not even Islamic, I mean, to begin with. So, but all those details can be found in my book, Why as a Muslim I Defend Liberty. Thanks for sharing the link, so I think people can see the link. But it is freely downloadable from libertarianism.org. And I'll be happy to answer other questions that might come through email. But really, thank you. I'm humbled and honored by today's event. I'm thankful to Professor Ruhaini, Professor Komaruddin Hidayat, Dr. Nina Nurmila. Professor Nurmila, is that correct? Yes. Sorry about yes. And thank you. And thanks to everybody for joining, and for Adi for organizing the event. One more thing, I have great hopes for Indonesia. I mean, I think Indonesia has become, it always has been, but Indonesia is one of the, perhaps the key Muslim majority society today, out of which good messages about the future of Islam is coming. Because the Middle East is traumatized for many reasons: authoritarian governments, violent, sectarian wars, a lot of problems there. But Indonesia, with a philosophy of pluralism, Pancasila, is that right? Do I say it right? And also an Islamic tradition that is moderate and open to the modern world. Indonesia has been adding a lot, and I think it will add a lot more. And I'm therefore happy to be, having these conversations with our Indonesian friends. And inshallah, hope to visit Indonesia someday so we can, break bread together and discuss these in person.
Please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Brother Mustafa Akyol, for sharing your thought and knowledge by speaking directly with us, also by writing your books, which open up our mind and in defending liberty. And I'm with you in supporting liberty for Muslim and also for all the humans being here. Thank you very much also to Professor Ruhaini Dzuhayatin for coming and sharing your thoughts, and also for our host, Professor Komaruddin Hidayat. And also I admire some of my friends here, like but maybe some of them have already left, Dzuhayatin, and then Ifa Misbah, for your struggles, Pamela, for your struggle in defending your liberty, not to cover your head and struggling against the imposition. Okay, Pamela is coming. And I would like to mention, Inna Allah la yanduru ila ajsamikum wala ila suwarikum walaki yanduru ila qulubikum. So you are all with us. You are covering your head or not, you are Muslims, yeah, and you are defending on your liberty. Thank you very much for tonight, Adi and Els, Mas Jerry, and everybody that I can mention one by one. Thank you very much. Let's close our
Nina,
event tonight.
We have thanks also for the presence of Marshal Cepi Hakim with us tonight.
Yes, I would like to say, yeah, thank you for Bapak Cepi Hakim, the commanders of army. Yeah, okay. Let's close our session tonight by reading Hamdalah, Alhamdulillah Alamin, and I'm very sorry if there is any mistake from me. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa.
Pak Weka, halo, maaf
Thank you
tadi
all.
tidak disebut ya Pak Weka. Mbak Pipi.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum to you all.
Terima kasih banyak.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam, Mas Komar.
Halo.
Pascal Cepi, terima kasih.
Ruhaini.
Mbak Nina, Nina, Prof Nina, tadi yang
Terima kasih. Oke. Live ya, selamat istirahat.
Terima kasih, Bu Nina. Selamat istirahat semua.
Ya, sama-sama.